Welcome to the Therapist Invitation. I'm Trever Shirin, joined as always by
Dr. Mark Mayfield.
And we are today talking about a mini series within this season on identity, purpose, and hope as it relates to the idea of loneliness.
Yeah, we had quite a few listens on last episode, which is awesome. And this is kind of just the first of three total. Don't confuse you. Of just really breaking these things down, because it's things we don't think about until we're in crisis.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's really easy to see loneliness as not crisis. And I think to some extent that's probably fair.
Sure.
But I think loneliness can be a breeding ground for crisis. And we don't often see loneliness in the way that is helpful for us. I think a lot of the times it's really easy just to acknowledge loneliness haphazardly and move forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of times we will, in the stillness of our own minds or souls, when we slow down, go, oh, I'm lonely.
Yeah.
And then move on, or we numb out, or we avoid, or whatever that looks like. And it doesn't really speak to the root issue. Which I do some time talking about in the book, of kind of the antithesis of loneliness is finding our identity, finding our purpose, and finding our hope. And I think it starts with identity.
Yeah. Right? Well, and I think something interesting too, you and I are currently prepping for a video for the collective on Erickson's stages of development. And the stage of young adulthood, maybe depends on who you're asking nowadays where that fits.
Yeah, they're 14 to
40.
Right.
The conflict is between intimacy and isolation,
but preceding that
is identity versus role confusion.
Yep.
And I think it's just interesting how, especially in Erickson's concept, you have to successfully navigate the stage of development prior in order to successfully navigate the current, right? And
that's up for debate for some people, but I think from a simplistic,
and I would say too,
linear mindset, yes, that's true.
You at least have to maybe do some back work,
right?
Too, I think in that way,
maybe navigating, I think might be a better way. Like you said, navigating the stages. I think is important, but all of us are not going to make it through perfectly.
Oh, no. No.
But the navigation of it is key. And I think then the awareness of where we might need some.
Yeah. Do I need to go back and do some more work on this stage?
Which is where counseling is so important.
Yeah. Because sometimes it's shoring up. But I think it's interesting that, it's intimacy versus isolation. And that's what we're talking about, is a little bit of, if we're not actually in relationship with others, if we're not pursuing intimacy, it is so easy to isolate ourselves and to turn our backs on opportunities to pursue anything other than loneliness. And I think that a key component of that is taking that step backwards in development and re-questioning our progress in identity versus role confusion, and figuring out even, some of Brené's stuff on shame, and how the difference between those who pursue vulnerability and don't is this idea of, if they knew me, they wouldn't want me, or if they knew me, they'd want me, which is all identity.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think part of the reason so many people have struggled with the intimacy, versus isolation stage of Erickson's development, which is usually 18 and older, to mid 40s, right, is they don't have a right understanding of self.
Sure.
Period.
Yeah.
And so we choose to be in relationship with people that we think complete us. I hate that phrase, because that's what we think, is that, okay, I'm deficient in these areas, and so I'm going to be in relationship with somebody that's going to complete me, whether it be a romantic relationship or a friendship. And I'm like, no, you have to be a whole self and enter into a relationship as a whole self to be in any kind of intimate relationship.
Yeah, there's almost this paradoxical element to loneliness and the longing for intimacy, where it feels like others are the answer,
Mm-hmm.
but realistically it's self, where we have to do the work ourselves so that we can engage others.
And that's scary.
Very. I mean, it's all scary.
It's all scary, but it's all existential. Like, why would I want to look into myself to answer the question, who am I? And I think for us as believers, I think there's a different question we can ask too. I mean, the who am I question is not a bad question to ask. I think we need to ask that question. But whose am I really comes out of our relationship with a higher power.
Yeah.
That doesn't fix it completely because of the world we live in. But I think gives us direction. You know, if we have identity because of what's been spoken over us, and this is why it's so important as parents, how are we speaking over our kids? Are we speaking truths? Are we speaking affirmations? Are we speaking that identity over them? Well, here's the thing. We're going to speak identity over them no matter what. It's just what identity do we want to speak over them, right? And so how we react and interact with our kids, I think, goes back to the other stages of Erickson's development, that we're laying the foundation for autonomy, we're laying the foundation for trust, we're laying the foundation for all these things, which really then lays the foundation for identity. And so I'm sure there's people listening going, I didn't have that. You know, what do I do? Well, it's taking that step, like you said, doing that self-work. It's taking that step back and going, okay, let me ask the question, who am I? When was the last time you asked that question?
A couple of days, I think.
Okay.
Well, mostly because I have clients that are asking that question. And
Sure.
I think anytime we engage someone else in the midst of that wondering, it causes us to wonder ourselves.
Right. So how do you, like, how have you wrestled? I'll share mine too, but like, that's a pretty existential question.
Yeah.
Who am I?
Yeah.
You know, I know my go-to is always, well, like, I'm a dad. Well, that's not who you
Yeah.
are. That's more who you are than what you do.
Yeah.
Because like, I am a dad. That's just, I've always, even before kids, I was kind of had that mindset. I think that can be a fair answer to that question. I'm a dad and I'm a husband. But I think a lot of times, especially as guys, we go, well, I'm a counselor. I'm a speaker. I'm a writer. I'm an author. No, those are things that you do that develop out of who I am.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, like, wrestle with me a little bit. How do you answer that question?
I think after a lot of wrestling through high school and in the stage of identity versus role confusion, and even in the stage of intimacy versus isolation, it was a constant struggle of wanting to fit into certain groups, wanting to have that intimacy in certain settings, and feeling either rebuffed or rejected or whatever. And so I think some of the struggle in isolation put me back to questions of identity, of, you know, maybe I just don't need anyone. Maybe I shouldn't reach out. Maybe I shouldn't, blah, blah, blah. Right. And I think what I've come to, and we'll see how it changes, but I'm noticing more of, like, even my mother's characteristics of almost this like laissez-faire, like easygoing, free flowing kind of pursuit, not in a way of like ditzy or fluffy, but more in like, there are some martial arts that, like, I'm thinking particularly, like drunken martial arts. It's a form of fighting that is supposed to mimic the movements of somebody who is intoxicated. And they do that by having very loose movements, that free flowing, very adaptive to what's happening. And I think there's an element of that I'm seeing in myself, where it's become a very firm foundation with a lot of the things that I was trying to focus on before as very free flowing and changing. And so it's this idea of, I may be in the role of father, I may be in the role of husband, I may be in the role of counselor, the role of videographer, all those things, but that's the stuff that's allowed to move. And what's true about me is I'm Trevor, and that's who I'm supposed to be, and it's good for me to be that, and I'm growing and I'm learning, and this is the consistent heart rhythm that I have seen.
But when you say I am Trevor, you say that I am wise and I'm kind and I'm creative and I'm understanding and I'm...
Well, I think it's actually been, it sounds more hollow, but it has more meaning for me because I've spent so much time trying to pursue, you know, Trevor the.
Sure.
It's this idea of like, no, I'm Trevor, and that's kind of enigmous, and no one else is me, and I can't find out about me other than from learning about me. Well, that kind of idea.
And that's where I would say, so if you were my client, I would say, okay, let's explore I am Trevor.
Yeah.
And let's break down what that means, whether it be through pictures or keywords or whatever that looks like, to begin to build that picture of I am Trevor.
Yeah.
Same thing for me. But I think, you nailed it when you said, there's this foundation part of me that I have to rely on, that, and so that I can be free flowing, right? We think sometimes that we can be free flowing, but if we don't have a foundation, we really truly can't. And so, I love that because, and I tell this to my clients all the time, strip away everything that you do. Who are you? Right. So I am Mark. What does that mean? Let's explore that. Let's break that down. Let's create.
Yeah. I usually ask my clients who are struggling with this idea, if I was to strip away your family and strip away your physical ability, and depending on like how sci-fi they are, like I'll either go like, if you were to wake up tomorrow a paraplegic, or if you were to wake up tomorrow a brain in a bowl, like, have you lost your identity, or does it still stand, and what is it?
Because some people have identity in the fact that they could bench press X, Y, Z, or they can, they run this, that, or that.
Things that feel, at least to me, and maybe this is just me, but they feel so insecure, like they could disappear at any moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're significant in that it brings joy to people, or that gives them some purpose, which we'll talk about later.
Absolutely.
But our next episode. But I think identity has to come back to everything stripped away. How do you answer the question, who am I?
Right.
And what I tell people all the time, and this I love, so side note for a second, I've just got done probably about a month ago reading and listening to Green Lights, Matthew McConaughey's memoir, and just his journey into acting, and how he was going to be a lawyer, but that didn't, all this kind of stuff. And one of his mentors in the field said, you need Hollywood too much right now. You need to take a break. And so basically his mentor said, who was a director, he said, basically, go lose yourself in Europe for a month and then come back. Because right now you need Hollywood so badly, you're going to make decisions that you're going to regret. He goes, you need to come back and just, you want Hollywood. You don't need Hollywood. And I've taken that concept going, with my book launch, with just life in general, like I don't need so-and-so or X, Y, and Z to endorse my book or to promote my book. I would love it, but I don't need it. So I'm not going to sell my soul, or I'm not going to do things that I regret later. But I think same thing with our identity, right? We think that we need relationships. And there's part of that's true, right? How we're created, how we're designed, and that kind of stuff. But if that's all we are focusing on, we need this relationship to do X, Y, and Z. Now we're sacrificing things that maybe we're going to regret later. And so just taking that concept that McConaughey talks about, going, I've applied it to a lot of my life, going, okay, I don't need that person to make me any different or to enhance my identity. I'm now foundationally okay with who I am. I can answer that question.
Yeah.
It is fluid, but I have that foundation. I want to be in a relationship with you. I don't need you. Does that make sense? And so I'm wrestling with that concept a little bit, but it's almost freeing.
Well, and I'm thinking back to our conversation about the core longings. And I wonder if it's actually that need that we feel is trying to use relationships in a way that isn't actually satisfying the true need that relationships are supposed to fulfill. So it's kind of like using food to help with our emotions. Sure, it can work, but it's probably not the best, because we can find the thing that food is supposed to satisfy, and we can find the thing that's supposed to satisfy that emotional need as well.
Well, yeah.
And if both of those are being met through appropriate means, then the need is appropriate and the need is beneficial, right? And so I think, because we've talked a lot about we need relationships, but I think oftentimes we end up needing, like wanting, desiring, pursuing, needing, and pleading for relationships to fulfill something that is not what those relationships are supposed to be fulfilling.
Or can.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and
okay,
if we're able to do some of the work to have those things satisfied, then the need that we have for relationships is appropriately satisfied by relationships.
Right. I mean, there are, for I guess an example, like, Thursdays, we homeschool, so the family is at the homeschool co-op, and Friday or Thursday is my writing day, right? And so I'm alone, isolated, solitude by myself, and I just pay attention to my thoughts, and a lot of times it's like I'm comfortable in my own skin, I'm comfortable in where I'm at, I'm traveling this weekend, I'm going to be by myself quite a bit. I'm comfortable in those because I've mastered in some ways the question of who am I? Do I miss my family? Absolutely. Do I want to be around them? Absolutely. But it's not this almost enmeshed, like, oh man, I'm just miserable. Like I'm not complete without them. All that kind of,
it's functional.
It's fun. Yeah. And so I think part of the conversation is, and what I want people to understand is that doing the hard work of asking the question, who am I or whose am I, and sitting with that means that you allow relationships to enhance that, not to complete it, but to enhance it. And the intimacy developed then is one that of autonomy and interdependence, which goes back to the biblical nature of marriage and one, two becoming one flesh. It's not enmeshment. There's two identities, two distinct identities, and they're autonomous, meaning that they can make their own decisions. They have their own brains, their own minds. But the interdependence is like, this is good. We want and need each other in ways that enhance our identity, not complete our identity. And I think that's the big difference. And we see that, I mean, so many times in therapy is, I got married because this person was going to complete all my fault. No, and you're miserable because you don't know who you are. You don't have that foundation of who you are. Now you're making decisions, right? We'll talk about this next week, but now you're making decisions based on like who you think you are, but you haven't done the work to do that. So now your decisions are kind of like all over. I mean, it's, I don't know, I'm rambling, but I think there's so much importance to slowing down and just taking a step back and going, okay.
Yeah. Well, and we've alluded to one of the major steps, in our opinions, to work through this is to sit with a counselor whose goal is to reflect back to you and to engage you, focus on you, not to tell you what to do, right? Like, I'm sure I've shared my idea of counseling being a mirror. You come in, hair's all a mess. I'm not going to fix your hair. I'm going to reflect back that your hair is a mess, right? And because you have the ability to comb your own hair. And so I think, that is the obvious big step. If this is something that's resonating with you, just finding a safe place that with a counselor who can facilitate space for you to explore this in a meaningful way is vitally important. Apart from that, though, what sort of suggestions might you have for somebody who, regardless of where they are on that spectrum, just wants maybe a clear idea of one thing they can do that is helpful in this journey?
I mean, I think you have to take time to sit with this question. It's not I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to answer it right away. Like, you've alluded to the fact that you've taken, you're
10 years,
13 years after your high school mess. And, I'm thinking about, the 20 plus years of mine, right? And we've taken that time to wrestle with it. It is not something that's going to be set in stone completely. There are portions of it but it's this fluid conversation. And I think giving yourself the time to brainstorm it is going to be huge. And if you don't know what I'm talking about brainstorming, it's this idea that there's no judgment of what's written on the paper. So answering the question, I am Mark, who am I? And then just free-flowing things that come to mind and on a blank page. And then what I will do usually is come back and circle the things that are similar. It's kind of like doing a research project of coding themes, but it's like, okay, what's similar? What do I relate to? What's important? And then going back and going, okay, what of my answers are actually roles that I can categorize as roles? They're not, we don't want to vilify them. They're very important, but it doesn't answer the question, who am I? That's what am I, or what do I do? And then come back and continue that. And it might be a day, it might be a week, it might be once a week you come back to that question and you do some more brainstorming. But I think it's not avoiding it. I know it's a very existential answer, but there's not a step-by-step process.
No.
It is am I willing to sit with that question as much as it scares me, as much as it makes me vulnerable, as much as it calls into question. If you're sitting here and listening to this podcast and you're older than 30, right? I mean, for this group, you're beginning to go, okay, what I've done and chosen to do matter? Yeah. What do I put my time to? Does that matter? So it's very vulnerable producing. For those that are younger than 30, it's an opportunity to ask the question now and to wrestle with it now,
and
so
look
that
ahead.
the decisions that you do make once you get to your 30s and 40s and 50s are purposeful, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks.
And I think, I would add, there's an activity that I love that is excruciating and uncomfortable. But I think just sitting in front of a mirror for an extended amount of time with the intent of just simply being with yourself. So being mindful of those self-judgments and not allowing them entertainment.
Right.
But just using the phrase, and I usually use this phrase continuously in my head, like, this is me. That's me. This is who I am. This is what I look like. This is this. Not judgmental, not berating myself or trying to avoid things, but just like accepting, that's me. Like, there are things about me that I can't change even if I wanted to. And how can I just sit with that and just accept it?
It increases your self-esteem in some ways, because it's like, okay, for the longest time, I don't like my face. I don't like my, well, this is me.
Right.
Can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So might as well accept it. So I think there's a big acceptance piece. I think I did that the other day. I'm like, oh, dang, I got some wrinkles. I'm getting old. Like, great. That's me.
Yeah. That's what I look like.
I'm okay with that. And I'm excited about it. And
like I said, excruciating.
It is, but it's the hard work that needs to be done. So I think those two ideas in tandem with a counselor can be really powerful.
Very. We'll see you next week.